Welcome to our LB's The Lover of Book author chat. Now to introduce this reigning queen of comfort reads. She's the New York Times bestseller of 9 novels, including How to Walk Away, Things You Save in a Fire, and her newest, what we're here to talk about tonight, The Bodyguard. Katherine writes laugh and cry books about how life knocks us down and how we get back up. She's been compared to both Jane Austen and Nora Ephron, and the Dallas Morning News calls her stories satisfying in the most soul-nourishing way, and I can't agree more. Her books have made countless best-of lists, and the movie adaptation of her novel, The Lost Husband, starring Josh Dumel, yummy, hit #1 on Netflix. And her novel, Happiness for Beginners, is in production now as a Netflix original starring Ellen Kemper, and you may notice someone there from Yellowstone. Katherine's summer 2022 book, The Bodyguard, was an instant New York Times bestseller, a People Best New Books pick, and was nominated for Book of the Year by Goodreads and Book of the Month Club, and an Amazon editor pick for Best Books of the Year, and so much more. But what was really cool, best-selling author Emily Henry called The Bodyguard, quote, a shot of pure joy. And the best-selling author Helen Huang calls it a perfect feel-good rom-com. Katherine lives in her hometown of Houston, Texas, with her husband, 2 kids, and their fluffy but fierce dog. I have to ask, what kind of dog is it?
Well, she's kind of a mix. She was like a little rescue dog, but she's little and we call her a Texas fluff ball, but that's not a real breed.
It is in your household. That's all that matters.
Yeah, she's very cute.
We have a huge fluff, but he's more like 100 pounds and thinks he's a little lap dog. So, it's all great.
Also good.
All right. This is a very random start to your interview, and I'm sure you've never had this one. Let's talk women's clothing and lack of pockets, because I love that you brought this up. And I said, yes, can we get something happening here? Because it's so true. Like, I need pockets.
I mean, yeah, pockets are like a whole thing, right? Like there's this whole subculture of people longing for pockets.
I love that you brought it up. It was a funny way to start it. And I thought it was a great, just in the moment, real emotion that I was having on that day. And I thought, thank you for putting that in there. The next thing I wanted to talk about was dumped. You really talked about what that word means, and you kind of analyzed it. And so let's just go ahead, because that's where this book begins. It's not in some high point. It's really in Hannah's low spot. So why don't you get us going on that?
Yeah, my favorite kinds of stories are stories about how things get better. I love stories about people who get knocked down by life and have to find a way to get back up. That's like my favorite kind of story. And I think that's partly because I'm not very good at that, like in general, like as a person, like when hard things happen to me, like I generally just want to like curl up on the floor and stay there for like days and days. And so it's really inspiring to me to see other people who like struggle and, face genuinely hard things and kind of do it with humor and grace. That's my favorite kind of character to root for. And that's sort of my favorite kind of story to read. And yeah, at the start of The Bodyguard, Hannah, I mean, there's a lot of darkness there. Her mother has just died, and she's just, and right after that, she gets dumped by her boyfriend. And then, and then she's kind of really panicking. And the way that she's always handled things in her life is to kind of run away from them. And she kind of gets grounded in her job, and her boss says that she has to stay home. And that's hard too, because she doesn't even have her sort of normal coping skills. And the dumped thing is something that it's something I think about a lot. I think we tend to kind of roll our eyes at people getting dumped, or we think it's some kind of cutesy thing, or like it's some kind of thing that doesn't really matter. But I mean, anybody who's ever been dumped, especially from a relationship that was like real and significant, knows that it's not cutesy. I mean, it's not something that you solve with a pint of Haagen-Dazs. It's like, it's a type of grief. So yeah, she starts out the book going through some really hard stuff, and she's going to have to kind of work through some of those things as the story goes along. And that's my favorite kind of story.
Well, like Hannah, not that you were being dumped, but you started this novel in a place that was, not your norm either. And coping skills were probably different. So tell us about your beginning to this story, where the seed came from, and that process.
Yeah, so this was my pandemic book. I was writing it during the pandemic, and I don't know how y'all were doing during the pandemic, but like I was not doing well. Like I really, really, I wasn't super optimistic, about our chances. I thought for sure we were just all gonna die. Like that seemed like the only sort of possible outcome. I was like, there's just no way that humanity is gonna pull it together. Like we're doomed, like this is it. And like every night I would be like, getting ready for bed, and my husband and I would be sort of like pulling back the covers, and I would just sort of very melodramatically be like, I want you to know that I have really enjoyed our time together, like this has been, I think we've had a great run, I really appreciate being married to you. It's been the great privilege of my life. We'll be dead in the morning, but thank you for your service. Was basically every night I would just kind of say that to him, because I was not, I didn't think, looking around, I was like, this is not going to end well.
You didn't go as far as writing an epitaph though, did you? Like, did you? Okay. I just have to, I would love to.
And that's partly how the pandemic was. The pandemic was weird, right? Like a terrifyingly weird time in history, completely unprecedented. And it's also partly me and my personality, because I tend to start with death in almost any situation and kind of work my way backwards. So that was also me. But I also, like surrounded by all of that weirdness, I also had a book, to write. And so it was kind of this weird question of like, okay, like given all of this darkness, what kind of a book am I going to write? Like faced with the end of human civilization, what book do I want to write? And I decided that I wanted to write the sunniest, cheeriest, sweetest, swooniest, most hopeful, most delightful, most charming rom-com I could possibly do, which was not super easy. And I really had to work hard to kind of try and access like my inner sunshine, because, I was trapped in the house with 2 teenagers and a very neurotic dog, and like a very sweet husband, but he's like an outdoor guy. He's not an indoor guy. So he was definitely kind of climbing the walls. It was weird, but it's how I made my own sunshine. I would say that typically the books that I write tend to be kind of half tragedy, half comedy. Like there's always something really hard that the main characters have to go through that is genuinely hard, in How to Walk Away. The main character is in a plane crash and gets a spinal cord injury and spends most of the book, in the hospital going through rehab. So that's real, genuine, hard stuff, but I always try and have it be half that and then half things that are fun, like half love story and half comedy and half banter. And, and for me, that is such an important part of the story, because that's the sort of physical manifestation of things getting better.
Mm-hmm.
When you are falling in love with somebody, things are getting better. There's a building sense of anticipation for all the good things to come in that relationship. And so, I put love stories in because I just like them, but I also put them in because they help balance out all the struggling that the characters typically have to do in my stories. Except that during the pandemic, I was like, do I really have to make her struggle? I was like, aren't we all just kind of struggling enough? Like, do I have to do more of this? And so I just decided to kind of minimize the struggling. I was like, you know what? We're fine. Like, I'm just going to make the present moment of the story. There's a few hard things, but it's basically, it's mostly, back rides and banter and, only one bed and fun things like that. Cause that was literally the way that I cheered myself up during the pandemic.
So you said something interesting, because normally it's this 50-50 split, but it was challenging to keep it so sunny all the time, right? And I know part of that was probably because we were in a quarantine, but I would assume also as far as your writing process and how you keep it believable and not just believable, but like that movement, because you don't have that natural arc that you're normally working with, your formula. So what did you do? How did you make it work for all of us?
Well, that's a great question. I normally have to force myself to do the hard parts, like the mean stuff that you do to the characters, like when you put them in a plane crash or like have terrible things happen to them in the moment. There's some terrible things that happen to my character Cassie and things you save in a fire. And I always dread having to write those parts. I never want to write them. I just want my characters to have a fun time and like goof around all the time. But I also recognize that, you know, the hard things that we go through in life and in stories, that's where the wisdom comes from, right? Like, you can't have the wisdom unless you go through that hard stuff. You have to go through the hard stuff to sort of figure out what does it all mean. You have to face things that make you question who you are, question what really matters, question how you're going to get through the day. Like, those things are important for us, and they bring us to these new insights about our lives. So I'm committed intellectually to having those parts. And I almost always put them in, but I will also say that it was kind of a relief for me not to have to do anything really, really terrible to Hannah in The Bodyguard. Like, it was almost like a present that I gave myself as well. I just let it be fun. I just let it be as fun as possible. And of course, she's starting out in a hard place, right? There are some real things that happen to her, and Jack has some hard things too. So they're both healing from like some stuff, but it's all in the past. It's not in the present moment of the story. And usually I work a little harder to bring like a little more darkness into the present moment of the story. But yeah, at the time I was just like, there's enough darkness.
Like, forget this. So The Bodyguard was really your guilty pleasure then, because
yeah, although I didn't feel too guilty about it. I mean, I just felt really good about it. I think if I can possibly not feel guilty about pleasure, that's a good thing.
Okay. We need to know, because we know Jack's profession is a movie star, and a huge one, and a hunk, and all these amazing things. So you mentioned in your note that he was not always a movie star. Can you tell us what your original plan for Jack was when you're like, no, this isn't working?
Yeah, so okay, this is such a great question. When I first started thinking about this story originally, early on, I knew that I wanted to write about a woman bodyguard, because I thought the idea of a woman bodyguard was like a really interesting job, first of all. And also the whole thing that sparked that idea for me was that I listened to a podcast where they were talking about how women are actually in sort of high demand in the bodyguard world, because nobody ever really thinks they're the bodyguard. Everybody always thinks they're the nanny.
Mm-hmm.
And so that lets them kind of move about sort of undetected. I mean, it gives them a kind of cover in a way that a big bruiser guy who, you know, looks like a club bouncer wouldn't necessarily have. And so it can work to their advantage in that job. And I love that idea that like the ways in which you're underestimated or undervalued could work to your advantage. So I kind of got caught with that notion. I wanted to write about it. And so then the very next question that I had, once I knew that that's what I was going to do, was, okay, who is she protecting, right? And of course I knew from even before I started that there would be some kind of a love story in there. And I'm always trying to figure out, okay, what's that going to be? Because that's the fun part. Mm-hmm. And so at first I thought, like, I researched it. I was like, well, who do bodyguards protect, you know? And they protect like wealthy business people traveling around the globe. They protect jurors in like sort of high profile cases, like court cases, who might be in danger. And then they protect, you know, movie stars and celebrities. And I immediately sort of rejected the movie star celebrity idea at first, because I thought it would be too fun. I don't know. I thought it would be too obvious. I thought it would be too unrealistic, too cotton candy, like too, you know, just too high concept. I was like, you know, and of course I went to literary school for many, many years. And in literary school, they always want you to keep everything as sort of real as possible. And they don't let you get too crazy with high fantasy. And it just seemed like too high fantasy to me. And so I started researching, like, I had to figure out what the trial was going to be about, and what the witness was going to be testifying about. And I started trying to read about like corporate malfeasance, you know, but it was the pandemic and I couldn't concentrate on anything. And I was super bored reading about corporate malfeasance, and I just could not make myself focus on it. And so all the other pieces of the story were coming into place, except for like who this guy was going to be. And I wound up talking to my editor about it. And I was like, look, I'm really struggling with this corporate malfeasance problem. Like, I cannot make myself pay attention to that. And she just went, make him a movie star. She was like, why can't he have a fun job? Just do that. And I was like, oh, are we allowed to do that? Like, is that okay? Like, is that, oh, and the minute she suggested it, like the minute, Jack just sort of came to life, you know, showed up in the story, and the rest of it kind of wrote itself. And it helps. and I don't know if you want me to talk about this later, but it does help that I got to meet Josh Dumel in real life.
Bring it. Go ahead. Just talk. Go ahead. We don't have to wait for Josh. Just go ahead.
So, a book of mine from 2013 called The Lost Husband got turned into a movie, and they filmed it in 2018, and they very kindly invited me to the set to be an extra. And I took my husband and my kids and my mom, and we all went to Austin where they were filming it. And I got to meet Josh Dumel on the set. He was there that day. And I just got to tell you, he was so handsome. Like, he was so handsome that I completely forgot how to speak. Like, I totally panicked. The whole quadrant of my brain that has all the words just like shut right down. I had nothing. And he's handsome, but he's also such a movie star, right? Like, he just like sparkles. He glows. I don't know what it is about him. He's like 6'5", and he tried to make conversation with me. Like, he came over and he was like, "Oh, you're Katherine. You wrote the book. It's so nice to meet you. I'm Josh, And my brain shut down, and I just stood there staring up at him and just gaping like a wide mouth bass. It was the craziest. And my husband was like right there. He was like 5 feet away looking at me like, "What is wrong with you?" And I was like, "I don't know. It's like some kind of hormones or something. I don't know what's going on." I felt like a rotisserie chicken at the grocery store, like spinning around, like my skin got all crackly and weird. It was crazy and exhausting, but fun, also very fun. And he's super nice. Well, but when I decided that Jack could be a movie star, I was like, well, okay, if that's allowed, I've got a lot of material. So there's a moment in the story when Hannah meets Jack Stapleton for the first time. And in the scene in the book, he has no shirt on. Josh Dumel was fully clothed in the moment that I met him. But she basically does exactly what I did when I met him, because I really panicked. So yeah, that gave me a lot of material.
Yeah, you were really just doing book research. I mean, if you think about it, like that was, on the set work. A lot of people are agreeing. Thank you for the no corporate malfeasance. Jill and Iz are like, they are in total agreement that was, hit the floor.
That was my thinking too. I was like, if I am too bored to research this, people are going to be bored reading it, right? You got to kind of trust your own inner compass about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, yes, it was definitely the right call. It was a lot more fun to write about Jack as a movie star.
And I'm with them. I probably would have fangirled too, just like you did. So, I think that's a realistic reaction, right?
Yes.
So the other thing you did though was you made Hannah a pretty strong character right from the beginning. I mean, I loved when she said, like, basically, "Bring on the insults. I eat insults for breakfast," right? So it makes her a formidable partner as a bodyguard. So what were your thoughts around her? Because obviously you have Josh Dumel there to set for him as that character for Jack, but what about Hannah?
Hannah is kind of a tough guy. Like, she can do all kinds of amazing stuff, right? Like, she flips him on his butt, like, early on in the story, and she can do stunt driving, and she knows how to shoot guns, and she knows all kinds of martial arts. And yeah, she's a tough guy. And I love that about her. And I really love writing characters like that, because I myself am not a tough guy. Like, I'm just like the most like tender-hearted little goofball in the world. And so when I do get to write a character like that, I feel like I'm a pretty good person to do it, because just by the very fact that I'm the person writing that character, it softens them. Like, another character I have who's pretty tough is Cassie in Things You Save in a Fire. She's a woman firefighter, and she's also very like impressive and good at all kinds of things that I am not good at. And I really love writing both of them, because they're both very strong in all kinds of physical and mental ways, but then sort of using me to kind of tell their story means it all softens quite a bit. And then they become hopefully people who are like, impressive and very good at what they do, and not in any way like weak or anything like that, but also like kind of normal, just kind of like normal people, even with all these like really impressive things that they know how to do. So yeah, she was very fun to write.
And I'm assuming from your note that you didn't know a lot about being a bodyguard. And so you talked about this research. Did you do it all beforehand and then plug it in as you write, or do you get to a situation and then you're having to figure out what would Hannah do, you know?
I do almost all of my research beforehand. So usually I turn in, there's a whole life cycle to a book. And usually right after I finish book tour on a current book, I come home and I'm sort of napping and resting and sort of recuperating from all the travel and all the fun and all the hugs. And then while I'm doing that, I'm like reading up on the jobs or the situations for the characters in the next book. And I really don't, I love to do research. I love learning about stuff. I love like kind of imagining what it's like to be other people. I think that's a really like sort of big part of liking being a writer. And I frequently figure out what the story is going to be once I know what's likely, you know, or like what would happen in that real situation. And you kind of can't know some of that stuff until you have really kind of explored all that territory. So like with How to Walk Away, the main character is in a hospital, like for a lot of the time she's in the ICU, and then she moves to like a regular room and she's doing all this rehab. And I visited hospitals, I visited ICUs, I went to rehab facilities, I interviewed doctors, I interviewed people with the same kind of injuries that she had. And I took notebooks and notebooks worth of like handwritten notes. And then I go back through and I highlight them. But I really didn't want to even conceptualize what might happen or what her day-to-day life might be like until I knew what her day-to-day life might be like, you know? And the same was true for Hannah in this book. Like I wanted to make sure that I knew like, what's it really like? And of course I'll never know exactly what it's really like, but I did as much as I could. I read a bunch of books and I listened. There was a podcast that I found that I listened to all the time. And I got like what felt to me like enough of a sense of what it's like that I could kind of work with it. But I never start until I feel like I've got it kind of down.
This time though, you couldn't go into a hospital. You couldn't go because you're now, you know, stuck in your home. So was it okay, that type of research, or did you find it challenging?
Well, and the good news is I set this story out on a ranch, right? And I actually set it on my own family's working cattle ranch because we are Texans. And my grandparents they both passed away, but my mom still runs it. So it's still in the family, a working cattle ranch outside of Houston on the Brazos River. And so, you know, Hannah's job was something that I had to research and learn about, but she doesn't really do all that much of her real job the way that it really works because of how the story goes, right? She moves out to the ranch with Jack and she's supposed to protect him, but she's not really protecting him the way she would really protect a person because she has to also pretend to be his girlfriend, right? And so there are adjustments to how the job works that made it I wasn't really depicting the real thing. I was depicting a person who knows about that stuff in a very different situation than she would normally be in. And of course, the ranch, you know, we were down there all the time. When I was a kid, I grew up going down there all the time. I had tons of birthday parties down there. We had school retreats and all kinds of shenanigans. I mean, I've been going there my whole life. We still go there every Thanksgiving. So that part of it was really easy. And that's what you're always doing with fiction. You know, you're doing parts that you're making up that you don't know as well, but you're making them feel real and three-dimensional and authentic by bringing in stuff that you really do know very well and that you can kind of write with your eyes closed. And so that's, you know, the ranch setting was the thing that was really very authentic. Like there are all these people who are like, this ranch felt really real. And I'm like, yeah, that's because it is.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, because it translated, like it was authentic. I felt like I'd been there. I know Iz said she wanted to stay at the ranch and didn't want the book to even finish because she just wanted to be on the ranch. It was just, it had such a sensory experience because you covered so much, like the details of the flowers and the floor. I mean, everything, like it was right there at our fingertips. So it was, I really loved that you brought that personal. And now we know why you set Thanksgiving there, because that was something your family did. Did it look like that? I mean, was it similar?
No, it's a little different because the ranch house, that's the Stapleton's ranch house, I set it in my grandparents' ranch house, which I mean, 20 years ago, after my grandparents died, my mom started renting that house out. Not like a VRBO kind of thing, but just more like, you know, yearly leases to folks out in the country who live there. And there's another sort of structure on the on the farm where we hang out like as a family that's like across a few fields from there. But that house, the Stapleton's house, is like, it's my grandmother's place, right? It's the place where we went my whole childhood growing up. And so, when you talk about trying to like make your own sunshine during the pandemic, for me, like mentally going to that house and being in that place where I had felt so safe as a kid, where like, back at that age in your life when you think the grownups have it all figured out and right, and they're like in charge and they're going to handle whatever it is, was so comforting to me, right? That was just huge, huge, huge. But really, honestly, at the time that I was writing the story, I had not been back in that house really since college. And what's funny is, since the story came out, one of the renters, who was kind of a hoarder and sort of messed the place all up, wound up moving out. And my mom and my sister decided, like, okay, we're either going to bulldoze this place or we're going to fix it back up. And they decided to fix it back up. So in the year since the pandemic, my mom and sister have been slowly renovating it. And now it's like sort of back in operation. My sister is going down there a lot, and it's like back to life. I feel like my grandmother's just looking down on all of us, like very, very pleased that we rescued it.
Oh, what a nice little arc to that story too. I mean, it sounds fantastic.
And when I go, but I got to tell you, when I go in that house now, my memories of the Stapletons are like stronger than some of my real life memories. So like the room that is Jack's room, like I'm like, this is the hallway where Jack gave Hannah the most unbelievable kiss, right here, right next to this door. And my whole family was like, could you please stop talking about imaginary people? And I'm like, I can't, it was so good.
Too ingrained. Now, are your grandparents and Jack's parents anything alike? Do you bring in some of their characteristics at all?
My grandfather was a very gentleman-like, sweet-hearted, kind guy. He had a building materials company, and he was this sort of good-hearted, very lovable, great with kids guy. So yeah, I think he and Jack Stapleton are actually kind of very similar. And then Connie Stapleton is a little bit based on a family friend of ours who is named Connie, actually, who is this sort of gracious and lovely human who I've always just, whenever I get around her, I feel like a cat. I just want to get up near her and kind of like rub against her and just be close, because she's just this sort of lovely, gracious human. So I kind of made her, it's always, what I'll say is, it's always kind of like making a collage when you're doing fiction. You're like pulling things, like one person's cute haircut that you saw in another person's great glasses, and, qualities in people that you've known. And then you kind of mush them together in this Mr. Potato Head way. And you kind of make these new people that sort of come to life. But yeah, I'm always pulling from people a little bit.
I loved that Connie made Hannah a sharer, because she really was kind of a closed off person, but she really was able to open her up. So we got to see more of her insides. And even, I guess we saw that again with Wilbur right at the end. So you did some pretty good magic with those characters for us to see more of Hannah and to appreciate more of where she's coming from.
Yeah, I think Hannah really, really, really needed, some kindness and some warmth, and never ever would let herself have that. But now suddenly she's sort of trapped on this ranch with all these sort of kind-hearted people who just kind of keep loving on her, and she kind of can't escape it. Like she kind of is left with no choice but to melt to it a little bit. And I loved watching that transformation for her.
And I loved that you described it as finally a relief for her. And I think I quoted like dipping your feet in cool water on a hot day. And it really was. I mean, like all this pressure just lifted, and it was a nice sunny moment that we all needed. So one of your big topics was insecurities though. So with Hannah, it was her looks. With Jack, it's more like, are the people around me really, do they like me, or is it just because I'm famous? What was it about insecurities that you wanted to bring up that as a major topic here?
It's always fun to take things that characters are worried about and force them to kind of confront those things head on, right? And so if Hannah just feels like a normal person, and I don't think of her as any worse than anybody else, like we all have doubts, or at least most of us do, about all kinds of things about ourselves. I love the idea that like she's just a sort of ordinary person, or she kind of views herself that way, and she has questions about whether or not she's lovable, and then she gets sort of like forced into proximity with this wildly famous and also ridiculously beautiful and also like very, very nice person. And that sort of forces her to kind of confront some of those questions about whether or not she's lovable head on. And especially because she's in this sort of pretending situation where, you know, they're having to fake things. So she's always having to rely on her own judgment and question her own judgment about like, all right, he just hugged me, but was that even real? Like it felt so real, but was it real? And what I love about that is that it kind of takes us to this sort of moment at the end where Jack sort of tries to deceive her about something, and she, faced with that deception, she sort of turns inward and relies on her own inner compass to sort of guide her through that situation and help her figure out what's really going on. And what I love about that moment is that it enables her to learn to trust herself in a whole new way about, you know, who she is in relationship to the people around her.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that she could have let loose as well if she wasn't having to pretend to be the girlfriend, right? Because that makes her lose her. I mean, she basically, all her inhibitions are just gone because she's having to fill this role. And she's a perfectionist. I mean, she's really good at what she does, so she's not going to go halfway.
Yeah, and she has nothing to do either, right? So this whole idea of like, oh, it's like a paid vacation. She's like, I don't want to go on vacation. Like one of her ways of avoiding all of that stuff has always been to just stay super busy all the time. And now here she is trapped on this ranch and she's technically working, but she's not doing anything. And that forces her to relax in this weird way. Like part of her job is now to like hang in a hammock with Jack Stapleton. And that, you know, forces her to kind of do a lot of the things she's been avoiding.
And it also allows her to make mistakes and for him to be more of an equal partner in that relationship. You know, I mean, he saves her on the Brazos. I mean, and I loved your explanation of the Brazos, because even as a Texan, I don't know that I knew that. Like I just didn't. So was that something, you know, on your field trips you learned when you went out to the ranch, or what?
It's a real thing. Like the Brazos, because like a lot of rivers have a kind of a rock bottom to them or a stone bottom that doesn't move. But since the Brazos is a sandy bottom river, the current moving through that river makes these eddies and makes these sort of sinkholes, right? That suck you down in this undertow. And I mean, it is possible that my sense of it is a little stronger than your average Texan, because of course my mom was always going down there with 3 little kids and all of their friends, and we were running around on the beach, and she really had to make a very strong case that if we went past our ankles into the water, we would die, because she didn't want any of us going swimming in the Brazos, because it really is not a safe river to swim in. It's possible she leaned on fear a little hard to kind of keep us all on the beach. But it is a dangerous river, and people do drown in there. I mean, you always see stories about people who went fishing and didn't come back.
Well, I think parents, we tend to do that first, you know, keep them safe. One of the things that you also addressed was self-love. I think that was a huge part of this, whether it be for Hannah or Jack or, you know, lots of the characters, actually, Wilbur. So can you talk a little bit about that and you know, how you used it and why it was so important?
You know, I'm really interested in emotional courage. I think as a culture, it's really easy for us to pay attention to sort of physical courage and, you know, brave things like, you know, storming the beaches of Normandy or like doing physical actions that are courageous. But I think there's this other kind of courage that sort of goes unsung, where we have to believe in ourselves, right? Or we have to stay up with a sick child when we're terrified, right? Or we have to look after someone we love in a moment after they've been injured, right? There's a fortitude that comes with continuing to love people even through all of the hard things that terrify us, that I think is very impressive about the human race. And so that's what that is. Like when I'm writing about those kinds of things, when, you know, I'm trying to kind of explore what emotional courage is, you know, the courage to sort of be brave in love, right? The ability to let loving somebody inspire you to face the stuff that you're struggling with, right? Face the stuff that scares you, like be courageous about your own life so that you can live better and be better and become sort of the best version of yourself. And I love stories about people who figure out ways to do that. And I think we tend to be very, cynical about anybody's ability to sort of get better. I think we always kind of, like in the storytelling world anyway, we tend to kind of assume that everybody's just getting worse, right? I mean, you see a lot more stories out in the story world culture that we have about the dark underbelly of society and people sort of falling apart and ripping each other to shreds than you do about stories of people who do sort of pro-social things, right? Listen to each other and care about each other and pay attention to each other and take care of each other. And I love seeing people do that stuff. And I love seeing people do it for other people. And I love seeing people do it for themselves. And I love how one supports the other, right? Like being kind and compassionate with other people helps you be that way for yourself and vice versa. So yeah, I'm always trying to get that stuff into the stories because to me, that's some of the most interesting stuff about humanity is our sort of potential to do that, even if we don't always know how to access it.
So are you a half full kind of person then, a glass half full?
That's a good question. I think by nature, I'm a half empty person, but I'm trying like hell to be a half full person. How's that?
Well, this is the perfect segue for Wilbur, right? Because this was your speech really, but Hannah's speech to get him to hand over the gun, because the quote was, getting lost in darkness forced him to go for the light. I think I typed that wrong, but to head towards the light was basically what you were saying. And I think that was the whole message with him. Like he could have been this doomed character, but yet he's making a selfie spot with birdhouses and like this whole new life for himself and found a new relationship. And so talk about him, because he was kind of a one-off at the end.
It's sort of it's like, I mean, on some level, I think the whole time I was writing it, knowing that she is a bodyguard, you know, there is a feeling that like, by the end of the book, she's going to have to face some kind of real threat. You know, it feels like putting that in there and then not having something about that happen would be a little bit of a sort of missed opportunity. Mm-hmm. But then the question is, okay, all right, if there's going to be a threat, what kind of a threat is it going to be? And I didn't really want the threat to just be your sort of stereotypical villain, right? Or your stereotypical scary guy. I liked the idea that it was a person who was just kind of hitting bottom and just totally lost and panicking and, you know, making some really, really bad decisions, but not necessarily unredeemable. And it felt really important to me that he not be unredeemable, and that maybe, you know, coming across some kindness and some compassion at just the right moment could help him kind of right his path. I mean, I don't think that's how it always happens in life. I mean, there are a lot of people who are just, you know, causing trouble for themselves and everybody else. But I loved the idea of putting a little hope in there around him and seeing that go just in a little bit of a different way than I might have first thought about it, or than the cliche version of it might have gone. So I just tried to make him kind of a distinctive kind of guy. I don't know where the birdhouses came from, but it was really fun.
There was you were mentioning, you know, this kiss, Jack and Hannah's in the Stapleton house. And in this novel, when you described it, we get destiny, fireworks, soul, flying, heavens, pulse, and a doorway to something divine. Okay, so that was me encapsulating your quote. Yeah. Do you have a favorite kiss, one that you've written that it stands in your mind the most, that you're like, oh yeah, that's the one I remember?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Because she has to do that. Hannah picks her favorite Jack kiss. So I thought I would throw it to you and say, what's your favorite Katherine Center kiss?
I mean, I like them all. There's a really fun kiss in my book, Happiness for Beginners, which is going to be a movie this summer, although that kiss is not in the movie. It's only in the book. So, you know, think of it as like an extra in the book. But where there's kind of a kiss that happens on a dare. This guy in the story, Jake, has a thing for the main character, and he is trying to sort of sneakily figure out a way to kiss her, and he challenges her to a game of Scrabble, and then she loses the game, and then they wind up kissing, and it's all I guess it takes up like almost a whole chapter, apparently. I mean, it's long. It's the whole scene is very long. And I got interviewed about it after that book came out. And the person interviewing me said, there's a kiss in this book that takes up almost like a whole chapter. Like, what's that about? They were like, is that kind of embarrassing for you that it's like so much page time for one kiss? And I was like, I'm not embarrassed. I'm happy for them.
That's
like,
right.
what's better than kissing somebody that you like feel a spark for? Like, that's as good as it gets. Like, so yeah, I went ahead and did that kiss, and I just like, it lasts a long time, and that's something kind of fun. I mean, I will say that The Bodyguard is one of my first books to ever be sort of classified as a romance. Typically in the past, my books were sort of like women's fiction with strong romantic elements, I guess was technically the category. And, but The Bodyguard, again, during the pandemic, I was like, what does the world need a lot more of? We need a lot more rom-coms. So I just went full rom-com with The Bodyguard. And what's interesting about that is that it brought all these new readers who had not read my stuff before to come and read the book, which is great. But a lot of them are romance readers. And, if you read a lot of romance, you typically get a lot of spice. And you typically get a lot of scenes that do not fade to black. And so I think there were a lot of people, in fact, I know there were because I saw their reviews on Goodreads, who were like expecting spice and then didn't get it. Because I really do kind of, I mean, I try to make the kisses themselves, very 3D and very luxurious and very enjoyable, but I don't go all the way to wherever any of us might like to go, because mostly because my husband is a middle school teacher, and he's got all these sweet little 6th and 7th graders who are very curious about what Mr. Center's wife is writing. And so they come to like library fairs and book fairs, and they buy my books, and then they have me sign them to them. And like, it feels like a lot of responsibility, right? To be kind of their first source. I mean, I'm sure the internet has found them. And then you could make the argument that it's probably better for them to learn about it from me than others, but it just feels like so much I've just got like middle schoolers sitting on my shoulders. So I'm happy to stick with PG-13 kind of stuff. And my kids who are teenagers are both just like, yeah, you don't ever have to write anything. Nobody needs you doing that. So I don't really write that stuff, but I do try to make the kisses as good as possible. And actually my new book that comes out this summer, Hello Stranger, there are a lot of scenes that are not kisses and they're not spice, but they're very, very 3D and very sensual in ways that I think are fun and kind of, if like having that limitation sort of forces me to get creative around that stuff. So it's all okay. But yeah, I think I'll probably never, I mean, maybe until my husband retires, I'll probably never do a lot of that.
There's always chapters, but is your next one, Hello Stranger, considered more of a rom-com, or do you consider it more in that women's fiction with a little bit extra?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm always sort of I think I put myself as sort of being on a continuum, right? And so like How to Walk Away, Things You Save in a Fire were maybe a little bit more, they're still rom-coms, but they're a little bit more on the women's fiction side. And because there's such an emphasis on sort of personal growth and the demons that they're struggling with and stuff going on. The Bodyguard is, much further down at the sort of romantic comedy end of things. Hello Stranger has a whole sort of medical thing that happens in the story at the beginning. And there's a good deal of setup to kind of get us where we need to be with that. So the main character winds up having to have a kind of unexpected operation, and she winds up getting a condition called face blindness. And that's where you can still see everything. Like you can still see just fine, but you can't make out human faces because that's actually a very specialized part of the brain. And if that part gets damaged or is having problems, it can mess up your ability. So you can tell that there are eyes there, and you can tell that there's a nose and a mouth. There's a face there. It's not just a blur, but you can't quite snap the pieces together. And that happens to the main character in Hello Stranger right at the beginning. And so there's kind of a lot there around that, but then there's also like a super swoony love triangle going on. So So I don't know. Y'all tell me, like, after you read it, I would love to know.
I'm reading comments and I love. Thank you is what this reads. And I don't see this as a spicy cover either. So it's not like the bare breasted,
Right.
like what you tend to associate with those types of books. So
Yeah.
what I'm reading is keep on doing what you're doing because we all love it. And we love what you do. So just keep being you is what I'm saying. While you're getting your questions together, be thinking of those. I'm going to hit Katherine with some rapid fire questions. Are you ready? Just answer just off the top of your head. Korea or London?
Korea.
Date night in or out?
Out.
Morning glory or night owl?
Night owl.
Bougainvillea or honeysuckle?
That's tough. Bougainvillea, maybe this week.
Okay. Beach, city, or ranch?
These are hard, man. Maybe beach, but I like them all.
Nora Ephron or Jane Austen?
Oh my, the cruelty. This is cruel. Oh God. I mean, I gotta say Nora Ephron. I mean, I can't say no to her.
Bookbinder or a USO singer?
What's the question?
Bookbinder or USO singer? So check out our website for that reference.
USO singer. Wow. Okay. This is intense.
Art or writing?
Writing.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
And last, book or movie romances?
Book.
Yeah. All right. You survived. Good job. All right. Who out there has a question? Because I know some people said they wanted to. If you can raise your hand, that would be fantastic. Let's see here. Allie, it looks like you are up. You have a question. Go ahead.
Yes, hello. First of all, hi. I'm so happy to meet you. I read Things You Save in a Fire last year. I was participating in a Sisterhood of the Traveling Book, and a friend of mine sent it to me, and I just fell in love. So I had to say that because it's amazing. But my question for you is, I know this was not the focus of the book, but whew. So as everyone's read it, right? I can talk about it.
Yes, go for it.
Okay. So obviously, Hannah goes through this like really, really crappy breakup because, her boyfriend, Robbie, ended up sleeping with her best friend, Taylor. And we know that there is a moment towards the end of the book where Taylor, is very apologetic and helps Hannah get ready for her date with Jack. My question is their friendship, on the mend, or was that kind of like I don't totally hate you, but you're out of my life forever type of thing?
That's such a good question. I really struggled with that, like, should I redeem Taylor? Like, does she need to be redeemed? And in the end, I wound up feeling so sorry for her, right? Because I also didn't love that she kind of went where she went and did the thing she did, but I think that Hannah shows compassion towards her, like that night when she's standing outside and guarding her in the apartment, like, and, of course she gets her heart broken too, and she didn't see it coming. And like, it's really disappointing. Like, you just want your friends to be better than that. But I don't fully know, if they'll ever fully mend it. I didn't want her to be completely forgiven and have, everybody in their pajamas having a sleepover by the end. But I wanted to leave that possibility open because people do dumb things, and I didn't want her to be, she's not an evil person, but she just did some bad stuff that may not be forgivable. But I kind of couldn't decide ultimately if she should be okay. But what felt important to me was more that Hannah could be, that Hannah wasn't going to spend the rest of her life like super mad about it, and have that like hardness that comes when you have to carry anger around about somebody. So I think Hannah kind of lets it go a little bit, whether or not Taylor will ever like fully redeem herself, I think has yet to be decided. I have a hard time with redemption. I like it, but I also recognize that some people, I don't think everybody gets to be redeemed. I really kind of struggle on that question a lot.
Great question, Allie. Thanks so much. All right, Mary Ellen has a question, and I'm going to get her spotlight up. Go for it, Mary Ellen.
Hi, Katherine. I actually don't have a question because you answered it, but I just wanted to tell you, while you were writing this book during the pandemic, you did such a kind thing for us readers, and you made for several days, you made What You Wish For available for free. And I needed that. And that was such a blessing. So thank you so much.
Oh, I'm so glad. I remember when that happened. Yeah, I just was like, let's all go to Galveston and like take a deep breath.
Oh, that was so generous of you. Thank you. And thank you for bringing that up, Mary Ellen. I really appreciate you saying that. Any other questions coming in? I know Jill had a question in the chat box. I'd love to know what Katherine's favorite book she's written. I know that's hard. And while male lead, she would most likely date if she weren't married, obviously.
Woo!
Hey, Jill, thank you for that one.
Okay, so what I will say about my books is that I think I'm getting better as I go along. So, whenever anybody is like, oh, I've never read your stuff before, what should I start with? I'm always like, just start with the most recent one and work your way backwards. Because, when I was really young and just starting out, I just wanted to write something good, right? But I didn't even really fully know what that meant. And that was a very broad idea for me. And what's happened as I've gotten older is I've gotten very clear about what I love in a story and what I'm looking for in a story. And like, I've gotten clear about my own compass, right? About like what I want to do for people, because the older I get too, the more I see stories as a thing that you do in the spirit of service for other people. It's like you're trying to give them all the feelings and thoughts and wisdom that you're kind of longing for yourself. And so, yeah, I think that as I get older and clearer about what I love, and the more I practice and the more I do it, the better I get at like doing that for people. So I will say that. And, in the past, like 4 or 5 books, like I love them all for different reasons, like they're just moments where sometimes I'll just think about something in a recent book and I'll be like brushing my teeth or something and it'll just make me laugh so hard and I'll just like spit toothpaste out all over the place. So I have a lot of affection for my book. Yeah. Yeah. Like, so I love them all for different reasons, but I love the newer ones best because I think when I first started out, I didn't really know what I was doing. I just was hoping to put together something that worked. And, they did kind of work. And you can see it, you can sort of see the DNA there, right? You can see the sense of humor and you can see the bantery dialogue. But what I didn't really understand was what I was trying to do to people. Yeah. Because, like one of my favorite quotes about stories is a story is something you do to a reader. Mm-hmm. And I've spent the past, I don't know, years since I was 12, decades and decades, trying to think about what I would like to have done to me and sort of starting with my own inner reader and then trying very hard to figure out how to do that thing for other people. And, I want to laugh and I want to swoon and I want to feel like a very salivatory sense of longing for these two people to get together. And I want to struggle and I want to take wisdom out of that struggle, and I want to think deep thoughts and I want to see reality kind of reflected in moments in the story that are insightful and that kind of bring me to like a new place of thinking about things. So I have kind of a high bar for like things I want to do. And I feel like with each book, I'm a little bit better at doing that. So yeah.
So thoughtful for us readers. Like we appreciate that. Kara has a question. Go ahead, Kara.
Hi, Katherine. I was one of the lucky people who got an ARC of Hello Stranger. And there are a bunch of us in the chat who got them and just loved it. And I loved it. Can you talk about your author's note in that book? Because it's fantastic.
Well, I was gonna offer to read that to you guys, but I don't know what kind of time we have. What do you think?
It's up to you, Katherine, because I don't want to hold you too late, but I have time if you do, because I know people would love to hear it.
Okay, what does it look like? Are people nodding?
Yes, they all are. Everybody's still on.
I'll read it to you. I've never had a chance to read it to anybody. The only place I've read it out loud is for the audiobook, which we just did a couple weeks ago. I went to a studio and recorded it. So if you listen to the audiobook of this new one that comes out in July, there'll be a little recording of me reading this essay to you at the end. Okay, I'm at the phase of my life where I have to switch glasses to do like real reading. I need the words to be really big. So I'm gonna change. Oh yeah, woof. All right, you guys are awesome. I'm gonna do this. This is very thrilling for me. Okay. The year I turned 40, I got a historical romance novel as a gift. After decades of studying creative writing and serious fiction, I had never really read romance before, but I pushed past the decidedly non-literary cover and opened it up to the first chapter to take a look at it. 3 hours later, I was in the car driving to the bookstore to get another one. I felt like a person who had spent her entire life eating boneless, skinless chicken breast, and I had just discovered chocolate cake. That book was delicious. It was blissful. It was life-changing. I was 40 years old and I was just discovering that books could be fun. It was the biggest writing epiphany of my life. I mean, I knew I loved love stories. I'd been raised on Nora Ephron after all, but those were movies. Movies were entertainment. Books, in my head at least, were work and not play. After that first gateway romance novel, I spent the next several years reading historical romances in a blissful haze. Did I say reading them? Sorry, I meant devouring them. I put duct tape over the chesty man candy on the covers, but I kept reading in the bubble bath at stoplights while stirring spaghetti sauce on the stove. There you have it. I fell in love with romance novels. For a long time, if you'd asked me why that was, I would have shrugged and said, because they're fun. But now, after much overthinking it, I have figured out, at least in part, why they're fun. It's because love stories really are unlike any other kind of story. All stories have an emotional engine that drives them. Mysteries run on curiosity, thrillers run on heart-thumping adrenaline, horror stories run on fear, literary novels run on lots of things, I guess, but certainly good helpings of worry. You know, you're reading along, picking up the breadcrumbs of foreshadowing the writers dropped for you, and you're like, oh God, that kid's gonna get arrested, or ugh, that man's gonna have a heart attack, or bet you $1,000 he is cheating on his wife. That's how all stories work. They all run on anticipation. We piece the clues together and predict what's gonna happen. But most novels use a fair bit of what's called negatively valenced anticipation, a sense of dread, a sense of worry, a feeling things might get worse. Guess what kind of anticipation romance novels use? Positively valenced. Romance novels, rom-coms, happy love stories, they all run on a blissful sense that we're moving towards something better. The clues writers drop in romance novels don't give you things to dread. They give you things to look forward to. This, right here, more than anything else, is why people love them. The banter, the kissing, the tropes, even the spice. That's all just extra. It's the structure, that predictable structure that does it. Knowing you're headed toward a happy ending lets you relax and look forward to better things ahead. And there's a name for what you're feeling when you do that: hope. Sometimes I see people grasping for a better word than predictable to describe a romance. They'll say, it was predictable, but in a good way. I see what they're going for, but maybe the word predictable has become predictable. It's so saturated with negativity at this point, there's no real way to update its vibe. Maybe we need a better term. I propose we start using anticipation, as in this love story really created fantastic anticipation. Structurally, thematically, psychologically, love stories create hope and then use it as fuel. Two people meet, and then over the course of 300 pages, they move from alone to together, from closed to open, from judgy to understanding, from cruel to compassionate, from needy to fulfilled, from ignored to seen, from misunderstood to appreciated, from lost to found, predictably. That's a guarantee of the genre. Things will get better. It's a gift that the love story gives to you. But no type of story gets more eye rolls than love stories. They're so unrealistic, people say, as they start another zombie apocalypse movie. What is that? Is it self-protection, self-loathing, fear of vulnerability? Is it pretending we don't care so we aren't disappointed? Is it some sad, unexamined misogyny that we as a culture really, really need to work on? I think love stories are deeply misunderstood, in part at least because they don't work like other stories. Love stories don't have happy endings because their authors didn't know any better. They have happy endings because those endings let readers access a rare and precious kind of emotional bliss. Yes, misery is important, but I think joy is just as important. I think the ways we take care of each other matter just as much as the ways we let each other down. Light matters just as much as darkness. Play matters just as much as work, and kindness as much as cruelty, and hope as much as despair. More so even, because tragedy is a given, but joy is a choice. Romantic fiction thrived during the pandemic, and there were lots of theories about why. People thought we were lonely, we needed escape, we wanted some laughs, all true. But I think more than anything, it's because love is nourishing. We all sense it deep down, I hope, past the snark and the tough guy exteriors. Love is healing. It's unapologetically optimistic. It's the thing that puts us back together, and it's a form of hope. So I write stories about things getting better, about people healing from hard things and trying to connect and working like hell to become the best versions of themselves despite it all. I hope this story made you laugh and swoon. I hope it kept you up way too late reading and gave you that blissed out, oxytocin-laden, tipsy feeling that all the best love stories create. I hope it gave you something to think about and maybe a new perspective. But more than anything, I hope it gave you something to look forward to.
Oh, that's so awesome. Like, for all you that have the arc, congratulations that you've already been able to read this. And now all of us want to read it because it is just, it's, oh, what a great author's note. Kara.
Thank you. You guys were very patient. That was kind of long.
No, like I would have sat here for like another hour. Like, I don't know what like, that was fantastic.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a manifesto that I did. And I will say that since writing that, there's been another thing that I've been thinking about a lot that I wish I could have put into that essay, because I saw this chart of emotions on the internet, not that long ago. And it was like a pie chart, and it had sort of emotions and their opposite, right? So like happiness and sadness would be the opposite pie piece. And they had anticipation as the opposite of surprise. And I really have been thinking about that. Like they're actually opposites. Like you can't be surprised by something you're anticipating, and you can't anticipate a surprise. Like those two things don't go together. Like you can't do either of those things at the same time. And I think one of the things we have this kind of cultural idea that like endings need to be surprising, but that just doesn't work for a romance novel. I mean, there can be all kinds of surprises along the way. You can have plot twists and things, surprises going on with side characters and all kinds of things that happen that you're not expecting. But what you cannot have a surprise in is the love story arc itself. Like you can't have a love story where you're surprised when the two leads get together at the end, right? Like that literally can't happen. If it does happen, you didn't read a love story, right? Because the experience of like the sort of guarantee that a love story is giving you is that it's going to create this totally delicious sense of anticipation. So yeah, in chapter 1, when the two leads meet, you're going to call it, you're going to say, those two people are going to get together. And yes, that will happen. And no, it's not going to surprise you, because the number one job of a person writing a love story is to create that sense of anticipation. And you can't do that and surprise people at the same time. But I do see like, love stories getting kind of raked over the coals for having that sort of predictable story structure. And I'm like, guys, there's literally no other way to do it. Like it can't happen any other way. So anyway, I think about these things too
And
much
thank you,
probably.
Kara. Like, I really appreciate that. I loved hearing you read it. And I just want to say, Kelly says fabulous. We have hearts from Shauna, Allie, Mary Ellen, Alicia, Lori, you name it, Christy. And I think Shanna said it beautifully. So beautiful and so true. Love how you thought so much about it and put it into words. Have you ever thought about teaching a writer's course? So, maybe a school nearby that might be a nice, easy walk, like where my son's going to go to school next year. Sign up for your course.
I have taught a lot over my lifetime, but I've found lately that just writing the books and touring around and finishing up with the raising of my kids has been like a lot. But yeah, I love to teach. I love doing stuff like that. It's really fun.
We have one more question. It looks like Melissa. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question, Melissa? Hi.
Sure. Hi. I just wanted to tell you how much I have enjoyed all of your books. They've been wonderful. And The Bodyguard was so nice, a nice distraction during pandemic. So it was point on, but I enjoyed it so much. After I finished reading it, I listened to the audiobook. My question is kind of relative to audiobooks. When your books get recorded, it's kind of a two-part question. How much input do you have on who narrates your book? And how do you feel like an audiobook takes your reader / listener into kind of a different way to experience what you've written?
Oh, those are great questions. I'll say I do kind of get to pick the narrators for the audiobooks. Typically what they do is they'll send me like 2 or 3 sort of audition tapes, kind of. I mean, they're not really tapes, it's all digital, but like a little digital file. And it's it'll be like a voice actress reading like a paragraph, of the story, or like a section. And I writing is very auditory for me. I hear them, especially with dialogue, I hear them saying it, and I hear them saying it in very specific ways. They all have all of my characters have a very deadpan kind of delivery on their banter. And so it is hard for me to listen to audiobooks of my own stuff, because even though I love listening to other people's audiobooks, because I have a template in my head of how I want it to sound or how I think it should sound, and it never sounds that way. And that's hard for me. That said, I can get past it, and I have had some fun reading some of my own audiobooks. But yeah, I forgot the second part of your question, actually. What was the second part?
It was just how is the experience different for a reader / listener reading versus listening to what you've written?
So, it's funny because everything that I know about grammar and like what to do with commas and where to put em dashes and stuff like that is all for me in the service of it's almost like writing sheet music on the page. It's like I will spend a lot of time trying to decide, should this be a period and give us a full stop, or do we need a comma here with a conjunction? And how do I want it to sound? It's almost like a kind of music for me. And so it does not always sound the same when it's being read as it sounds in my head. I'm trying so hard when I'm punctuating to make it so that what I'm hearing in my head is what the reader is picking up off the page and hearing in their head. I don't know if that's true. Actually, I have no idea what it sounds like in everybody else's head, but I think about it a lot. I mean, everything I'm doing on the page is to try and make it sound a certain way for the reader. And I know it's always fascinating to me to listen to audiobooks, because I'm like, this is nothing like it sounds in my head. And then I start thinking, is this how everybody is hearing it? When they're reading it, are they hearing it like the audiobook person or like me? So, I think about these things a lot, but I will, and I've often fantasized about just getting to read my own books, because I very much I would like for it to sound the way it sounds in my head. I'm pretty specific about how I want it to be. But I don't really get to do that. I'm not qualified to do that. I mean, people who read audiobooks are actors, and they went to school, and they, there's a whole process, right? And so, and also, I think listeners of audiobooks, especially fiction audiobooks, for the readers to kind of do voices a little bit. And I don't know how to do that. Like I could only ever, if I were reading them, I would only ever read them as myself. So I'm not really qualified to do it, but I have gotten to read a couple of short stories, which if you guys are ever bored, you can go find them on my website. I wrote a couple of bridge stories to a couple of my books, and then I got to read the short stories. But yeah, you know, I'm just always hoping that what people are reading, what they're hearing in their head is what I heard in my head. And I'm doing everything I possibly can with grammar to try and, you know, write that music in that way for them. So yeah, so I think that I think that I certainly get a lot more, I mean, in general with audiobooks, I'm very pro, and I get a lot more reading done because of audiobooks than I would ordinarily. You know, there's lots of stuff that I can just listen to and also be, you know, folding laundry, and it's really great because you're getting books. And I believe that audiobooks and fiction are audiobooks and reading on the page, they're two different ways of reading, but the stories are the same, right? Like, so you're still getting your story, you're just processing it through a different sense. So I love audiobooks in general, and I'm so glad that, you know, the digital revolution has made it so easy for us to listen to them all the time. But yeah, I always struggle with mine a little bit, listening to them my own self. Although I must also say, I'm sorry, I'm rambling on now. I love the narrator who did The Bodyguard. She's an actress named Patty Murin, and she starred in Frozen on Broadway. And so she's like a real singer. And I got so excited because there's a moment in the story when she sings something, and she's singing a line from Dream a Little Dream of Me, which is like, there's this little moment when Cassie kind of sings it. And I was like, guys, we've got a Broadway star singing this line from the book. Like, this is crazy. So that was very thrilling for me. And the other thing is, I know Patty Murin just a little bit, and I interviewed her for the book. So she's lovely. And she very kindly like hung out with me and talked with me on the phone for a long time about what it's like to be famous. She's one of the people I asked about what it's like to kiss people you don't know. And so it's so funny to me that she wound up reading the book. I was very thrilled about it. And I think she did a great job. You know, everybody loves her, and rightly so, because she did a fantastic job. But she, you know, but for me, she's not me, because there's always a little bit of a clash between what I heard in my head when I wrote it down and what winds up coming out the other side of things.
Great question, Melissa. Thank you so much. I know someone asked this question before, and I always ask it too. So what books would you recommend for us readers that you've read, that have come out, or maybe they're still about to come out?
Yeah, no, I've read some good ones this year. So I have several recommendations that are kind of in my sort of similar genre, which is kind of the rom-com worlds, if you like all those fun feelings. One is, I just read my first ever Abby Jimenez book, Yours Truly, and it is funny and it is so well done. And the minute that I started reading it, I just had this kind of like relaxing feeling of like a sigh of like, okay, this person knows what she's doing. Like, I can just strap on my seatbelt and like enjoy, like I could turn off all my editor brain and just like have a fun time. And it's a great read. She's very good. Anything by Emily Henry, obviously. She's got a new one that just came out this week called, oh my God, it's right here on my table, called Happy Place. And she very sweetly actually recommended The Bodyguard in the back of that book, which I thought was amazingly nice of her. I read a book in January called Georgie All Along by a writer named Kate Claiborne. She also wrote Love Lettering. And she's great. She's really just a really strong writer. And, you know, I just love when you're reading a rom-com, like what I'm looking for when I'm reading a rom-com is like, I want to feel all the feelings, right? I want to get angsty, and I want to be just invested, and I want to be rooting for them. And I want to just be like on the edge of my seat, waiting for them to kind of figure out their stuff and get together. And all of these books that I'm talking about do that. Like Emily Henry's definitely the queen of that. Another one I really loved is The Unhoneymooners, which is a Christina Lauren rom-com, which is actually mentioned in The Bodyguard. I loved it so much, I put it in The Bodyguard for fun. So Jack Stapleton stars in a fictional movie version of The Unhoneymooners. And yeah, I had some fun with that. So those are all sort of rom-com things. I wholeheartedly recommend all of them. And then the one other book that I read recently that's kind of outside of my genre, but I just loved it, was The Soulmate by Sally Hepworth. And it's like a kind of a psychological, it's like a mystery thriller, like a thing has happened and we're trying to figure out how the thing happened. And it's, there's a lot of, the emotion that it engages in you primarily is like curiosity, right? Because nothing is as it seems. And almost every chapter, like you get to the end and there's some twist and you're like, what? And I don't read as much of that type of fiction as other kinds. And when I read this book, I was just totally sort of blown away by like, this is super fun. Like every time I think I know what's happening, it spins around and it's something else. And then I've got to kind of start all over. So it was really, really a great read. And she's delightful.
Well, lots of agreement in the chat about all those recommendations. I can't thank you enough, Katherine, for joining us tonight. Readers, thank you so much for joining us. Please make sure to check out her website, because as we've just read the author note for Hello Stranger, she's about to go on book tour when that comes out. So check those locations and see if you can't see her in a city near you.
Yes, I will be on tour in July, and I'm going to kind of around in the Midwest a lot and a lot in Texas, and come see me. And also I've got a newsletter that you can sign up for. And I send out like 6 a year, like really it's 4 times a year. And then there's a little flurry right around book release time and a little flurry in the fall when we have a cover reveal. And then that's really it. But it's like one of my favorite things I get to do. There's a ton of love in it. And I think of it as like joy for your inbox, and you can try it out and sign up. And if you don't like it, you can unsubscribe and I'll never know. And it won't hurt my feelings because I don't even look.
Well, I think everybody loves you. And so I'm sure that a lot of them have already signed up for your letter, but I know like Christine's ready to see you in Georgetown. So get ready. These are big fans. If you did miss part of this chat, please check out my YouTube channel, LB the Lover of Books, where you can check out all my author chats, including her cousin Caroline Frost. I don't know if you knew that, but she wrote Shadows of Pecan Hollow, which is not a rom-com. So if you're looking for something outside the genre, you can check out that. You can also check out my Instagram, LB the Lover of Books, for recommendations and more. But we're going to be shifting gears on Monday, May 8th at 8 p.m. We're going to mix it up, and I'm going to interview Kate Quinn, the queen of World War II historical fiction, The Diamond Eye. I'm going to let Alison Pataki convince you to read this one. She's the author of The Magnificent Lives of Marjorie Post, and I think this is a great Mother's Day book. So if you're looking for something along those lines, here's what she said. Kate Quinn amazes me. With each new book, she reaches new heights in her craft as a writer of page-turning plots and prose. The Diamond Eye is a remarkable story filled with heart, intrigue, breathtaking drama, and perhaps best of all, meticulously researched details that prove that history provides the absolute best raw material for storytelling. Like her sniper subject, Mila Pavlyuchenko, Kate Quinn has brilliantly hit her mark. This is a stunning novel about a singular historical heroine. So if you know of an author like Kate Quinn, like Katherine Center, that you'd like to hear from, let me know. And I hope to see you on our next chat, but more coming up. Thanks, guys, so much for joining. Thank you, Katherine.
Bye, guys.
Absolutely love you. Yeah.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Back from Texas.